Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Pan Celtica, the series about Celtic belief, history, society, and the culture at large. Now, we've previously learned that the Celts lived in different parts of Western Europe, and this was about 2,000 years ago. They were known as being fierce warriors, right, from everything that we have recorded about them. And they were also known for their artwork, which we still see today. And, that being like knotwork and lots of curved lines and spirals, a lot of smooth shapes, not a lot of harsh or angular artwork. Everything is smooth and curved. And they also had a pretty unique religion from what we do have recorded. Their beliefs were a crucial part of their identity, I would say. Uh, Although, what spiritual beliefs aren't crucial to a Bronze Age, people, but I digress. Today we're going to talk a little bit about what the Celtic religion was, how it evolved, and its modern day significance. So we have to go back to its origins, right? As I said, the Celts are considered a Bronze Age, uh, that being a sect of time in history. They're a Bronze Age people, and as I also said, this was thousands of years ago. Uh, you know, at this time of which we're speaking, Christianity, just to put this into uh, reference in your mind here, Christianity was just a small little thing over in the Middle East, right? It had not even reached Rome at this point. It, it was just this little offshoot of Judaism of radical people. It had not really spread to the rest of the world yet. So this is the height. This is really the last swan song of of global paganism, at least in the West. Um, so over here in the British Isles, Ireland, France, parts of Belgium, we've got the Celts, and they were a polytheistic people, as were pretty much all pagan societies. There are cults within these pagan societies that were what we would think of as monotheistic, but they were monotheistic in the sense that while they worshipped one specific deity or maybe a very small group of deities, they didn't discount the existence or completely remove themselves from the veneration of other deities. They just focused on one particular deity. So we do have instances of that, particularly in the Celts, with the god Lu. There are many cults to Lu across Celtica, with different names, and also to specific female water spirits. Water spirits seemed to be a very big deal to the Celts. Water, I would argue, was probably their quote unquote favorite element as a people, from Aristotle's Four Elements, because they seem to really hone in on it and revere its magical powers in their communities. But they did have a variety of gods and goddesses that they worshipped, and we do know that they believed in an afterlife. We could get into the specifics and talk about the Summerlands or the other world, but that's not that important for this conversation. We also know that they believed in a form of reincarnation. Now, this is not exactly the same idea of reincarnation that, we'll say the Hindus have, who are obviously the most famous group of people to hold the concept of reincarnation to us in our modern knowledge, right? We always think of the Hindu belief of reincarnation. Um, we don't have the specifics on what the Celts did believe in reincarnation, but we do know that they did believe in it, and that rather than always coming back as maybe another person, as we think of it now, you would come back as all sorts of things, like animals, plants, even just elements. And we do see that in Hinduism as well, but I digress. Of course, we have to talk about the Druids. I've mentioned them in the past episode as well, right? That the Druids were more than just priests or magicians. They were judges, right? They had a lot of functions, but they were a social class, a very high social class in the Celtic society. And there were people who had devoted a lot of time to the, acquisition of wisdom and the practice of magic. They revered nature above everything else, and they believed in the interconnectedness of all things. It was very shamanic, very pantheistic, very, very animistic. And I think everyone who gets into Celtic history wish that there were firsthand accounts of all of this. The Greeks, for example, were just like, like chef's kiss. Like, they recorded everything, like every single thing about their history, from the most like mundane minutia to very significant moments in their history, very detailed accounts of their belief systems, rituals, spells, like all this beautiful, wonderful things that we have. We can really pretty accurately reconstruct Greek life and Greek belief. We can't do that so much with the Celts because they were an oral tradition, which I've also spoken about. And most of it did get incorporated into Irish mythology and into, as I've also spoken about, fairy tales and the like, right? So it's a real guessing game and a puzzle playing kind of game to establish what it actually looked like to practice Celtic religion. Specifically the Gaulish Celts, and I've talked about this last time, I think, maybe, or the time before in this series. The Gauls being the Celts, the more southernmost Celts. They believed also, of course, in a big range of gods and goddesses, like tons. I would argue on par with Hinduism, right? Hinduism is infamous for having like hundreds of deities, some of which are clearly variants of each other, but still, I would say, even if you tried to absorb all of these variants, you would still come up with triple digits of deities or very powerful spirits in Hinduism. And I think that is, we know that is the case in Celtic belief as well. There are so many spirits. And yes, a lot of them are just, as I said, female water spirits, genderless water spirits, spirits of specific pieces of land or a certain tree. But there are a lot of like proper, what we'd see as like a Greco-Roman definition of deity as well. And to the Gauls, we've talked about Epona. She was very, very popular with the Gauls. And so was Cernunnos. Now, the Irish Celts, if we're going to talk about who was who, like who was popular with each group, if the Gauls had Epona and Cernunnos, the Irish were all about Lugh and Danu. They loved them some Danu and some Lugh. The Welsh Celts were all about Mabon, almost exclusively, I would argue, but all about Mabon and Lugh. With a different spelling. You may be thinking, what about the Dagda? What about the Morgan? They were important deities, obviously, but I would say in terms of like the mass appeal from the recorded history we do have, Dagda and Morrigan really are more modern, like neo-pagan celebrations. Uh, they're huge now in our group, right? In our group, in our in our modern witchcraft and pagan communities, right? They are very large and popular. Uh, you know, while the Celts were polytheistic, they were also monotheistic, and as I said before, because there were certain cults or sects of people that focused on one particular deity as a worship for their village or their group or their tribe. But at the end of it, we can boil down their belief in these deities and their relationships, these deities' relationships with each other. It all leads back to this one single god. Much like in Hinduism, you guys know at this point, I love comparative mythology. I mean, it's a part of my doctoral study right now. And I love to compare Hinduism and Celtic religion because I think there are massive parallels to be drawn there. That the line between them is not hard to see, and that's something that's fascinated me since I was a teenager. So in Hinduism, all these deities have relationships with one another, like the Greek gods, and ultimately it leads to Brahma, right? Who's like the ultimate supreme deity, of which all other gods are his children, his lovers, but also manifestations of himself or itself. We sort of see this with the Celts as well. All of these deities are brothers and sisters, but also lovers and cousins, and also all come from this one supreme mother deity of all existence. And usually that is by the name of Dana, or Dana, or Danu, Danan, lots of names. I personally like Donna. I love the name Donna. So so calling her Donna is just something that I enjoy. But I know it is in today's magical community, we call her Danu. That's the most popular. But I just find it interesting, that we actually see it almost everywhere. In all pagan cultures, there's always this primordial force, even older than the gods themselves. And for the Celts, that is Dana. As for rituals, let's talk about rituals. The Celts performed a whole bunch of rituals. As did, pretty much all society. We still perform rituals. Ritual is just a part of human experience and practice. The Celts did, famously have fire festivals. Festivals, centered around fire. Literally. Figuratively, in all ways. Fire was a focus for them when it came to worship and celebration. And the most important festival from our recordings would definitely, I would say, would be Samhain. Beltane being a pretty close second, but Samhain, no doubt, is the most prevalent across all the tribes of the Celts. That date or dates around it are very, very significant for the celebration of, life and the changing of nature, the rebirth and the passing of one season to the next. We have that even now. Obviously we celebrate Halloween around the time that the ancient Celts would have celebrated Samhain. And modern pagans and witches celebrate Samhain itself in a new form. it marked the end of their harvest season, right, and the start of winter. And we see this also in Wicca. There are some really fun stories, like modernizations of Samhain or symbolisms of Samhain. We have the idea of the Oak King, right? This king of greenery and lushness, fighting usually his uh, successor, which is sometimes also seen as his brother or his other self, the Holly King, right? And the Holly King defeats him and gets to reign for the dark half of the year until the Oak King is reborn and rules the light half of the year. I love that, but that's not actually like historically sound. Like, as far as what we know now, everything we know is always subject to change. We could always, fingers crossed, find some amazing uh pottery or murals or writing, imagine that, from the Celts that explain differently. But the idea of the Oak King and the Holly King are basically 20th century, late 19th century inventions, but I love them. I think it's amazing. Um, Going back to Samhain, the Celts believe that the veil between the worlds, that being, our world and the other world, um, which is important to distinguish that, the other world is not just the land of the dead, it is also the land of just spirits in general. The Celts believed that there are beings besides humans that inhabit this world. Well, animals, I should say, and plants. They inhabit this world too, they just are non corporeal, right? But their existence is just as valid as ours. And that being, like, for instance, certain types of fae, and of course the ancestors, all resided in this other world. And on Samhain, they were able to more firmly appear in this world. And to some degree, there seems to be a belief that they actually gained corporeal forms on Samhain. And that gets in, to the whole practice of, jack-o'-lanterns, which were really more like turnips and things before they came to North America. All sorts, the laying of knot work in your field, and that's a whole another thing. But bonfires, going back to this being a fire festival, right? Because Samhain is one of the 4 sacred festivals of fire. Bonfires were lit to symbolize the purification of souls, and much like on Beltane and Mabon and almost on all of the fire festivals, there are 2 bonfires lit. And, animals and people and all sorts of things can be walked through the 2 flames, or sometimes, if you want to be daring and drunk, they would jump over the flame, to be cleansed and to be blessed by the fire. It's important to remember that the fire is very sacred to the god Lu, as I mentioned before, who is a massive deity across all of Celtica. And while there is no direct recordings of this, I think it's pretty safe to infer that in the practice of this fire hopping or fire passing, certainly the blessings and purifications bestowed upon you from the fire were probably attributed to Lu. But again, we don't know for sure. But bringing it up to the modern day more, as I said, Celtic religion, really, aspects of it are still practiced everywhere. In our neo-pagan groups, in Celtic Reconstructionism, in Druidry/Druidism today, in witchcraft, in Wicca, of course, and all types of forms of magical practitioners. It's certainly still practiced here in the South. I've talked about this, I think, just the last episode or so. Oral tradition is very big in the South. So many, like Irish and Scottish folk tales are still told here in the South. They're just reworked to take place in the South. And we have direct evidence of that, because the time frame of, us being here and living over there is much shorter. So we can see the translation and evolution of Celtic or, post-Celtic peoples coming to America and flourishing this culture in the South, which I love. I love that. I think Celtic mythology is probably more popular now than it has ever been in history. And I really think that's true. Of course, I'm not counting pagan history. I'm talking about, this post-Christian world. I think it's more popular now than ever. And I think that is because of Wicca, um, witchcraft, the internet, of course, and, us being more accessible to information. I think people are drawn to the Celts because they are so mysterious. Because we don't know a lot about them. And also because it is a lot of people's it's a part of a lot of people's ancestry. It's a big chunk of our family trees. I mean, tons of us across the world have some form of lineage back to, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, Britain, etc., 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 France, Turkey, like all these places that did inhabit Celtic people, right? And specifically in America, I think that we have this huge desire to always look into our past and find validation there because we are sort of, we're still a super young country and we don't necessarily have that history to pull on as a cultural identity like other countries do that have been firmly in place for hundreds and hundreds of years, unmoved and unchanged. Also in America, we are so many different peoples that have come together to be one people that our culture is inherently not one full assimilation as a culture. We are a multifaceted culture, we are this like salad of culture, we're a lot of different pieces all together, but we're not one solid piece. Do you know what I mean? So I think that Americans, we do, to the laughing of some people out of America, by the way, we are kind of obsessed with finding out who our ancestors were before America. And that goes for all of us, regardless of race or whatever. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that Europeans, for example, really take for granted their history, already knowing their history, having a deep-rooted tie to their ancient history because they're still living on the land of their ancestors. They still have relics standing of their ancestors. We don't have that in America. And, I would like to say maybe one day we will, hundreds of more years from now, Americans will. Hopefully, but I'm not so sure because, America is all about destruction and rebuilding of things rather than preservation of things. But that's something that hundreds of years of now, our predecessors will have to determine. Anywho, that's a brief overview of what we do know about Celtic religion, about what they practiced specifically. We could have gotten into things like the Wicker Man and, human sacrifice, but I think I might make that a whole nother episode. These first few episodes have all just been little primers as I decide on what we should go really deep into. I keep giving you broad strokes. Kind of just, I'm still feeling out whether or not this podcast is wanted or going to be successful. So your feedback is always appreciated. And until next time, check out my website, alabamamagic.com. And don't forget to like this and subscribe. And until next time, be safe, be well, and be informed. Goodbye.